أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad ajil farajahum. Before getting into the topic, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all of your deeds and mine for the events, commemorating the events of Ashura, of Karbala, the tragedies that befell the household of the Holy Prophet, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us re-commemorate those events every year today. And I was hoping that we make it into a little bit more of a discussion to cover the events of Ashura through your eyes, through what you heard and what you thought about. Whether it's related, and I don't know if any of you attended the nights that I lectured, or anything else you thought about, you heard, just so that we at least take advantage of those events, make sure that we understand them properly. If there's anything that maybe you left there with something new that you hadn't thought about, a commitment, a change in your life, you had questions about things you heard, that something is not clear to you about the events of Ashura, I thought we would start by talking about that, because these are the days and nights that we're living nowadays. Is there anything specific that you think was new to you this year that you heard, learned, or anything that meant to you that maybe there's going to be a change in your life because of something else? Because when you share this, it can help others to go through the same kind of thinking. Maybe they didn't think about it that way. Or general questions. For myself, the topics that I addressed, I think were, the first one had to do, for instance, with, is our relationship with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam supposed to be more rational or more emotional? Another topic had to do with making sure that when there are opportunities that arise in our lives, that we seize them. Another one had to do with what gives us the strength to face difficulties in our lives. Another one had to do with, in those important or difficult moments in our lives, where do we draw the energy to decide, to understand what we're deciding, which is choosing between heaven and hell, choosing between one big outcome or another big outcome, really interpreting big decisions from that angle. So this is what I covered, but Samahat al-Sheikh was here. There were other nights where some of your brothers here covered some topics too. So is there anything that you think you would like to discuss a little bit more, to know a little bit more about, or just general thoughts, things that you found very interesting, very good, and maybe just a reminder for everybody, or things that have an impact practically in our lives, something that's applied, that means that maybe our lives change because of that?
I can start. I realized actually, like this, during this Muharram, like we say it every year that like it's important and everything, but I realized that like from your 5 speeches and from the Sheikh as well, that the actual waqa'ah of what happened in Karbala is more than just a war between two armies. It's actually like a lesson that you can apply to your everyday life. There were like the examples you gave between like the Sahaba, how they dealt with the others, how Imam Hussein alayhi salam till the very end tried to help the opposition actually from doing what they did at the end. It's just like there's always a connection between the story of Karbala and our everyday life today. I thought that was very interesting to realize, as I heard like the story over and over again. It's like it's the same story that we hear every year, but at the end of the day I can still relate it every year to struggles or opportunities that I have in my life today.
It's very good. Thank you.
For me, I really like. I think I like simplified it. I think basically, I think like what Imam Hussein is trying to teach us is that uh, no matter what the quantity of the mushrikeen is, or no matter how powerful they are, or how much powerful they get, if you believe in what you know, like in what you know as information, and you believe in your faith, then you shouldn't make power change it, because you shouldn't be afraid of power. You should only be afraid of God. I think that's like the way I see it.
Hmm. I'll comment about something. That's a good point. I'll come back to that once we hear from everybody. Good point. Thank you. Yes. Who else?
I have something to say.
Okay. Yeah.
So, me, like this Muharram, I really got closer to Ahlul Bayt because before I used to think to myself, how do I know there's a God that exists? How do I know that? Because we don't see him, we can't really tell for sure whether he exists or not. But this Muharram, when I reflected on Ahlul Bayt and their characteristics or personalities, I think there's no way that these people existed without a God having given them divine knowledge. Like, for example, everything that happened in Karbala, the Imam Hussein's stance and how he never changed his mind, he never accepted what his opponents wanted him to accept. There's no way that any other human would have that kind of stand unless they're influenced by Allah. So really, that didn't leave any doubt in my mind that there's a God watching over us. And that's really what I learned. But a question that I have for you is, how do we really know that all of this happened? Because we never saw it happen, and we know that history can be written. So, like, how do we know that everything that comes to us is what actually happened? That's a question that I have to ask.
Okay.
And sometimes, like, even like there was really emotional stories. Did they really happen, or is that Qari trying to like get our emotional side?
Because a lot of things are hard to believe when you think about them.
Okay. So let's keep going around and then we'll come back to that. Okay, so these are, I'm going to look at this as two questions, but yes.
Ali, this is the first session attending this huge group, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he wasn't in the group before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining, man.
I appreciate you for telling me.
Always.
Okay. تفضل. Yeah.
I don't know, like one of the speeches that like I remember the most is the one about Haram.
Yes.
That one, I don't know, it's like the fact that someone can be that evil or whatever, like you didn't really experience to be that evil, but like person can be in that state and he just switches. It's like crazy. And like I don't know, it's like you say it happened, like, oh, Imam Hussein give him mercy and all that, but it's like, if you really think about it, it's really crazy that he actually gave him mercy. It's like,
It's not that easy.
it's not that easy. It's like, you know, in your regular life, you're driving or whatever, some guy cuts you off, you get so mad, you know? You get mad at that, something that simple. But something that big can just be freaking like that. It's just like, I don't know, it's crazy. It's like...
Sorry.
Trouble.
I just wanted to clarify the question though. Sorry, the crazy part is that he went from like pure evil to pure good?
Like, no, like the
second?
parts of the story, how one person went from pure evil to good, how one person forgave a person that evil. It's just like these stuff like that.
I got you.
They're just like so big. It's like...
I also think it's surprising how like a person like Har, who invested so much in his evil side and so much time and so much effort, can like turn in an instant and start from ground zero in the good side. That's also a big factor, but I think it's all about how strong you believe in something and how bad you want it.
And also, it's not over until you're dead, right? It's like, if you're still alive, then the test is still going, right? So it's not over.
Yeah, it's like one of the things that I mean, like when I can connect it to my everyday life. It's like one of the lessons, like no matter how bad you think you are, there's always like a way like you can ask Allah for forgiveness. For example, you know, we all end up doing some sins, you know, but it's just a matter of fact of actually like admitting to yourself that you actually committed this and like manning up to yourself
And repenting.
Like, yeah, exactly.
But it's like the quote you have to remember that he says, where he stood and he's choosing between hell and heaven. Like, how many times in our life do we fall in a situation like that where we can choose the right thing or the thing that will give us joy at the moment, but then we know that later we're probably going to regret it, or like, choose the good thing to do to begin with.
Yeah, I had maybe 2 points. Well, one of my favorite ones, actually the favorite one, was like how to live without regrets to seize every opportunity, and how like the story of when he was going on his way to Karbala, and how interactions between him and the people that either took the opportunity or didn't. That was my biggest takeaway, I think, and what I connected with a lot. But in general, I feel like, especially the last two Muharrams, it's like there's something. I feel like there's something special. I don't know if it's the energy or something, but every time I come back, it's like not only like the topics that are spoken of all 10 days and so on, they kind of connect with me at that time that I like at that stage of my life, and then it gives me that like recharge and that reconnection and so on. Like we have Ramadan and so on, but it's like it's different with Muharram. It just it gives me like that recharge for the rest of the year, and it's like every year it keeps going on.
Thank you.
No, one thing I really liked about the English parts was the emotional, like why we do the emotional things we do for Muharram and things. Because before, I don't know if it was just me or what, but I was kind of confused as to like why we would do some of like why would we ultim, why would we cry, why would we see all these men crying. I don't know if it was just me or all of us when we were younger, but no one really explained to us why we do these things. We just, or at least to me, I just kind of saw them do it and thought that's what was right. But to actually get an explanation, to understand why, you open your eyes, you understand, So something I have to go with.
That's a wonderful thing, man.
So do you feel now you understand, or
more? I understand more.
More. Okay.
It opens some doors, It's like,
yeah.
And not just a bunch of men weeping.
Yeah, fully understand.
Okay, so let me go on very quickly over some of your comments. They're all very, very good, very deep. Thank you very much for sharing. So Sayid, until you said that no matter the difficulties in your life, what you took away is that you, regardless of the amount of people facing you, the difficulties facing you, you saw how Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he did not change his mind. At the end of the day, you're only afraid of God, and that's all that matters. So, while this is completely true, I think we do have to add a bit of nuance to that. At the end of the day, we all agree that we're only supposed to ever only be afraid of God. And we agree on that. There's no issue about that. The difficulty sometimes is to know what's the correct behavior we're supposed to do in a certain situation. Imam Hussein alayhi salam had lived 57 years of his life before Karbala.
So it's 57?
57.
That was in 40.
No, he was 57 years old. Salamullah alayhi. And, for the past, let's say, 10 years before that, he did not lead a revolution. And it's the same man, with the same faith, with the same fear of God. So, the principle is 100% correct. But sometimes in life, it's not about, I lead an army and I go into war and I get killed or I kill someone else. This is the how. And the how is very much detailed. It depends on what circumstances we're in. مثلا, in the society we live in today, there's no war, there's no violence required, but knowing who I am in this kind of world, knowing what my identity is supposed to be, and that I'm proud to carry my faith and proud to act the way I act because I have conviction that this is the right way to act, that requires a lot of confidence because, maybe Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, when you think about it, based on history, and we'll talk about that, based on history, these were 70 people standing against at least, and history tells us the smallest number was 30,000. The bigger number was 70,000, And the biggest number was between 110 and 120,000.
30?
30.
Okay.
30000. So even if it was 3,000, but it wasn't. Only the group with the Hur were about over 1,000. So when they joined the big army, they were at least 30,000. The big army of Umar ibn Sa'd when they came. And that's why we hear like Al-Farazdaq when he told Imam Hussein, what I saw behind Al-Kufa is they had seen wars. This was not the first war. And he still told him, the army that I saw being prepared against you is the biggest army I've seen in my life. So we know their numbers, even if there is a difference on maybe it was a bit more or a bit less, we know that we're talking in the tens of thousands. You have to take a moment to imagine that scenario. You're standing there, imagine, like, if you go to a manifestation and there are 1,000 people, it looks a lot. If there's over, let's say, 10,000 people, it starts to look like an ocean of people. And anyone who has gone to Hajj knows what an ocean of people. At some point, whether there's 2 million or 5 million, it doesn't make a difference anymore. Khalas ba'ad, it's just to see, it's an ocean of people. So the reason why this is important, I think, for us, and I talked about this, that's why I didn't bring it up too much this year, but I've talked about this a lot in the past, and I don't like to repeat the same topics, although they're very important. Some of them, I feel they don't get old because they need to be rethought in different ways. And one of them is the issue of your identity when you're a small minority. We are a minority. We're a very small group. We're a minority in Islam, first. So إحنا as Shia, we're a small group within Islam. Islam is a lot bigger than us. We're lost in an ocean called Islam, our little group. That's one. Two, Muslims are nothing in the grand scheme of things when you look at Canadian society. Let's say we're 3% of Canadian society. 5%. We're not 5, but let's say 5%. It's still nothing. It's still of every 100 people, there are 5 who are Muslims. Think about that. So, the situation of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, as dramatic as it is, keep in mind that, again, to come back to your point, it applies to us very much. Our situation is not to carry a sword and to go fight anyone. But the faith we're carrying, the identity we carry, is no different than that. You are very much a tiny minority in an ocean that is going against you. You're going against the current. So you need to find a way to, one, know who you are. Who are you? What is your background? What represents you? Where do you draw the line which says, this is you and this is no longer you? To what extent are you willing to assimilate and integrate and let go of things to fit in? And where do you say, no, this is not a matter of fitting in anymore, because this is my identity that's going to be taken away from me. This is my faith that's going to be taken away from me. This is the real me that I cannot compromise or negotiate. This is non-negotiable. So this is the part that I think it's a very good point, but I think it's important to add our religion is very deep and very nuanced. Maybe it wasn't in the lectures here, but the lectures before, I spent a lot of time on that point. I think it's important to realize to what extent, if you study the lives of all of our Imams, and the Holy Prophet, and all the Prophets, generally speaking, our Imams, because our lives are very detailed to us, and we can spend time studying them, you see to what extent and to what degree they're very strategic. They're tactical in the way they interact politically and in society and with enemies. And this is an important point. Life is not only always about black and white, about fighting and peace. Sometimes there's a place in the middle. Sometimes I have to negotiate. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, he had to negotiate a peace treaty with Muawiyah. And Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam fought against his son Yazid. While for 10 years Muawiyah was alive, Imam al-Hussein didn't fight Muawiyah. He maintained the same peace treaty with Muawiyah. Why? Okay, well, this needs us to sit and read and think and study history and see if we were in the position of the Imam, does it make more sense? Going back to you, fear of God is the most important thing. So it's not what makes more sense to me as a person. Does it make more sense religiously? Does it make more sense for the future of Islam that is supposed to extend all the way to the end of times? Does it make more sense to fight or to sign a peace treaty. And this is a point that I'm saying, not everything is always about black and white, fight, not fight. It's what's the correct maneuver, what's the tactical or strategic behavior that is required of me given this whole situation. And this means, as Muslims, us, especially a good group like the ones we have today, you guys are educated, you're young, you know how the society works. This is where we have to emphasize, we have to underline, highlight this, very important. We have to know how the world works. You cannot just be superficial about it and say, it's just like this, and be naive and be simple about it. No. Go into the details. If you read how our imams interacted politically, especially in their times, because their lives were always in danger. The enemy was always trying to kill them. They were always a minority. And yet they still managed to remain alive long enough, to have people around them long enough, to be the ones preserving Islam so that it reaches the next generations. So what were they doing? When did they push and when did they pull? When did they fight and when did they say, what do you want me to sign? I'll sign. Peace treaty, okay. You want me to become the heir to the throne and become, the ruler after you die? The Imam knows he's going to kill him before. But that's it. He came, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, for instance. You study each one of their lives and you start seeing where you understand all this tactic, the strategy. Which for us, going back to your point, how does this apply to our lives? It means we have to do the same thing. If you're in a minority situation, you have to understand how the economy works. You have to understand how the media works. You have to understand how politics works. You have to understand how marketing works. You want your idea to go in society, you have to use the right marketing tools. If you don't use them, that's it. There are other people who are spending a tenth, a fraction of the money you're spending. You think, I'm going to just make 2 million posters and put them up. And someone for free, he can sit and tweet about it. And he tweets the right thing with the right buzzwords to the right people, and it's retweeted. And his message reached 10 million people, and yours reached 2,000 people. This is where you have to be smart. A good Muslim, the one who follows Ahlul Bayt, he's smart. It's always strategic, deep, tactical thinking. You understand how society works and you behave accordingly. Okay, that's one point. Thank you. Second point. Your point was very, very good. We have a hadith, many of them from the Holy Prophet, from Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, that tell us that the ways to go to God are equal to the number of the breaths of all the creatures. Basically saying there's an infinity of ways to go to God. The way you described it today is something that it's a proof for the existence of God that is very rarely mentioned. It's mentioned not even in 1% of the books talking about God, which is you recognize traits in divine people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put on earth to represent Him. That's one of the reasons why God put those people on earth. That's the whole point when the Quran says, instead Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have put angels on earth, but He didn't. He put human beings. Angels, human beings would say, but they're angels. Of course they're going to do that. They're angels. They don't feel what we feel. They don't have the problems we have. They don't have the flaws we have. They don't have the desires we have. No. God made it a point to send human beings who are made of flesh and bones and feelings of everything like us, but He gave them a divine message. And they are pure, they are geniuses, and they know how to carry that message properly. But then we can use them as role models, and that opens the door to, then there must be a God. These people are just like me. So what makes them so special and so different? There's something behind. So this proof, it's a beautiful proof, very, very rarely mentioned, and you hit the nail on the head. So kudos to you for that. That's the first thing. But then there was your question, and you followed up on his question, which is about history and historical facts. So this is a big topic, but generally speaking, how do we understand history in general? How do we know that the study of history, it's based on what? How do we do it? And then specifically Islamic history. So there's history in general. If I want to study, let's say, the events that took place in World War II, what do I do? Where do I go? And how do I accept or reject the information that's coming to me? And then this gives me the general principles to study history. This is any historical study. And then Islamic history, we have to decide, is there something special, different about Islamic history specifically? So Islamic history is actually special. It became special when the Holy Prophet became the Holy Prophet. And there are parts that it's difficult for me to say exactly how, but clearly the Holy Prophet taught the people around him to write down and to document everything. Because there's something that happened since the Prophet, this man called Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, since he became a prophet, there's something that changed in the world. And one of the things that changed is we don't really have a lot about what was happening in that world before he became a prophet. And then suddenly we have all these texts. So we know that the Holy Prophet, indirectly or directly, he was asking people to write down everything they were hearing, they were saying about him. And then from that point on, this is what we call Islamic history. If you compare the history of any other nation of the world, any other religion of the world with Islamic history, it does not compare. There's stuff called Islamic history that we think is laughable. It's not really Islamic. But by non-Muslims or by people who spend their lives, let's say a historian, just a general historian in the world, who specializes in the medieval times of, let's say, Harun al-Rashid. Okay? So we're talking about the same time period as Imam al-Kadhim, Imam al-Rida, before Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, in that period of time, which a lot of people refer to as the golden age of Islam. And this is all stuff that maybe inshallah one day we'll really dig deep into to understand it better. If you read the lives, let's say, of those people, you will find details in there that really astound you. That even those little fine details that were happening in society were being documented. Especially if they had anything to do with the life in a palace or in a khalifa, which you don't find in any other history.
Like even when they're saying Imam Ali was used to feed Fatima and stuff, like how would they know about that? Things like that.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that point too. That's in addition to normal history. So what we do know, and anyone who is objective when they study history, to start with, a first point to keep in mind, Islamic history is much better documented than any other history in the world. There's no religion, there's no culture, there's no civilization that has as much detail, as much documentation about its history as we have in Islam. Nothing compares, nothing comes close to it. The way the biographies of people were written, and now that branch of history was taken out and it became a field called Ilm al-Rajal. Ilm al-Rajal is basically you study the life of someone only to determine at the end of the day, can you rely on them if they tell you the Holy Prophet said something? So they might have existed 200 years after the Prophet. So you have to study who were their teachers, how well did they memorize, when they resaid a hadith, did their teachers think that they made a mistake when they memorized the hadith or not? So some of them, they say, he was thiqah, he was reliable, he was good man, he prayed, he was a huge abid. كثير النسيان. So as good as he was, that man, his problem was that he forgot a lot. So he probably switched words around, forgot some words in his ahadith, forgot names of people, whatever, means he's not reliable Or the opposite. Okay, some people, they say, this man he wasn't good, he was fasiq. He was outwardly, in front of everybody, he was doing some sort of dhanab. We don't know what is, or sometimes it's written what dhanab it was. But he was amazing at memorizing. So then you have to come up with a rule, and this is the whole ilm, but those scholars in that field have to decide what to do with that. But to do this, which it means what? It means you're adding rigor, you're adding criteria before you accept or reject the hadith from someone. Right? No other in the world, no other nation, no other culture, no other civilization has anything close to this. Where you say, but who reported it? You'll say, a picture was taken or someone wrote something and that's it. They're not going to say, who are his parents? And who are his teachers? And what did they really think about him? And the people around him, and who are his students? And did they all think that he's reliable 100% of the time? Did he make mistakes? Did he remember? Or was he one of those who, he had Alzheimer's at the end of his life and, everything he said after year 65 you can't rely on. This is how detailed it is. So, this is kind of the general principles to know about Islamic history. When you compare it to any other history, nothing compares. Okay.
Everybody's writing and documenting everything.
As much as they can.
As much as they can.
And you have scholars within who are always saying, this is all rejected, this is all accepted, this you can rely on, this you can't rely on. This is going on generation after generation, and it's still going on today.
Okay.
So, in terms of rigor, it's very rigorous. Does it mean that we accept everything that comes? No. So, does it mean that there are no mistakes, that everything is good and everything is reliable and? No. So this is where, for instance, if you go to an incident like the events that took place in Karbala, you have to go back to the oldest sources of the historical facts. So we know the names of some of the narrators who were there. For instance, we have 3 or 4 maqatil that were written during the lives of the A'imma. Some were lost, some were kept. Okay? For instance, there's a maqtal that Al-Tabari really relies on. Why Al-Tabari? And I mentioned him in some of the lectures very quickly because I don't want to make it technical. But it's important to mention for someone who has a technical background. Do we accept everything that Tabari says? Of course not. But Al-Tabari, if you want to say classic history in Islam, well, he's the greatest, biggest name, most popular, most famous name in Islamic history. A lot of the history comes from Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari relies on a book. Al-Tabari only came hundreds of years after those events. He relied on a book that he had, Maqtal Abi Mukhnaf. Okay. So you have to study the life of this man. Who does he report from? That's 1. 2, you have to see, did the version that Al-Tabari had, that he's saying this is Abi Mukhnaf's Maqtal, was it the original one? And there are people who dedicate their lives to go finding manuscripts. They travel from Turkey to Spain to France to Iran looking for manuscripts. They want to see the oldest copy of a book that they can find and compare it with other books that they found in other libraries and see which one is the most authentic one. And did something change from one version to another from year 300 to year 600? And this is where they find, this riwayah is mawdu'a. This riwayah is a fabrication. It wasn't there in the original version, and suddenly it appears 200 years later. And sometimes a alim will come and say, it's not a fabrication. It wasn't mentioned. The person scribing, copying the book, because they didn't have photocopiers, the person who was copying the book forgot 2 lines. Here's an older version of the book. I found it, and I found that it's not a fabrication. It was there. This guy forgot it. Okay? So all of that to say, it's difficult to say all the events happened or did not happen. This is a field in the world of Karbala, specifically because of its importance in Islam, what events actually took place and what events didn't. There are books that have been dedicated specifically to the historical dimension. They compare all of this and they give you the crux of it. And we have scholars who are known to be much more reliable than others. Like for instance, if you want to study the lives of the Imam, for instance, a lot of our scholars praise one scholar for all of the lives of the Imams. For instance, Sheikh Baqir Sharif al-Qarashi. He has a 40-volume encyclopedia that describes the lives from the Holy Prophet to Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallah Farajah. For the events of Karbala, for instance, as I said, first of all, you have the maqatil. There's 4 or 5 of them that everybody repeats a lot. One of them that the a lot of the scholars like very much is Maqtal al-Mukarram, Abd al-Razzaq al-Mukarram. He's a Sayid, he was very well known, he was a very strong speaker, and he would read the Maqtal, and he was a very big scholar and a historian. He has a book about Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, he has a book about Imam al-Hussein and his Maqtal. So the Maqtal part is there, and there's also, he has essays in the book where he comments and describes parts of the events of Karbala, for instance.